I'd trade 10 herds for one night inside you. That summer, West Texas seemed cursed. Not a drop of rain had fallen in months. Standing at the edge of a dry well behind her house, Celeste pulled on the frayed rope with calloused hands, hauling up the heavy bucket. Water clung only halfway down, murky and scarce. The rusted rim bit into her palms, leaving thin lines of blood. She made no sound. Biting her lip, she tightened her grip and dragged the weight to the surface. At 26, Celeste looked older than her years. Her black skin shone under the burning sun, veins showing clear beneath. Thick curls were pulled back in haste, her angular face worn deep by sleepless nights. 8 months earlier, a timber accident had taken the only husband she had ever known. When they carried his body home, Celeste understood life had shifted forever. Now she stood alone on this scorched land. No children, no kin. Only a fading wooden house and a few chickens gasping for water. Yet she would not bow. Each dawn she rose before light, stoked the fire, went to the field, and carried the weight of the world as if her shoulders had been built for it. Word of her hardship spread through town. People spoke not only of her failing land, but of her being a black widow, stubborn enough to stand alone. Each time she stepped into church, eyes turned sharp. Some slid down the pews away from her, as if grief itself could be caught. The whispers stung, but Celeste lifted her chin and never let tears fall before others. That day, in her worn dark dress and sun-bleached hat, she walked into town to settle the cornmeal debt at the general store. The heat pressed down like fire, dust curling with each step. She stopped short at the doorway. Henry Dalton. His name carried both respect and fear. At 50, streaks of gray lined his hair, his belly heavy, yet he carried himself with the swagger of a daily rider. Half the county lay under his ownership, along with the local bank. Those who dealt with Dalton knew the charm on his lips masked a predator's teeth. "Celeste Johnson," Dalton said, lifting his hat with a smile caught between gallant and sly. "Dry land like this, how long can you hold on?" A young woman, alone. What a pity. Celeste narrowed her eyes, silent. Dalton stepped closer. His wide hand landed on her arm, holding too long, a weight that pressed like a claim. Around them, townsfolk pretended to shop, though their eyes flicked toward the pair. "I could ease your burden," Dalton went on, voice sweet as syrup. "One word from you, and it's done. Be my wife and every debt disappears, your land safe forever." A chill ran through Celeste. She tried to pull free, but Dalton held for another beat. Blood rushed to her face, anger and shame burning together. Across the way, a few women giggled behind their hands. Celeste drew a steady breath and answered, cold and even, "Mr. Dalton, this land is mine. I will neither sell it nor trade it, not for anything." His smile faltered, then curved into a sneer. Leaning close, he murmured loud enough for all to guess the words. "Don't be foolish, Celeste." Folks don't remember promises. They remember who's strong enough to stand over them. He let go, straightened his hat, and strolled away as if nothing mattered. Celeste stood there, face flushed, heart pounding, while contempt and whispers closed in. From the cafe porch across the street, a man had watched the scene unfold. The brim of his hat hid half his face, but gray-blue eyes stayed fixed on hers. The coffee before him had long gone cold, yet he hadn't moved. When Dalton walked off and Celeste entered the store with her spine straight and her pride intact. The man lifted the cup, took a sip, and nodded as though marking her in memory. He didn't speak, didn't rise, only sat there, broad shoulders casting long shadows on the wooden floor, eyes following the widow who carried her dignity through a storm of scorn. His name was Ashton, and in that moment, the story of Celeste and Ashton began. Evening had settled low by the time Celeste left the store. The empty bucket swung at her side, her thin back leaning with each step. Her worn shoes sank into the red dust of the road home. Behind her, eyes still clung, and the market's whispers kept circling her mind, making each stride feel twice as heavy. A limp of hooves sounded from behind. Celeste turned, clutching her skirt by reflex. A horse came forward, mane tangled, front leg clearly injured. Upon its back sat a man upright, broad shoulders casting long shadows. He raised a hand, voice roughened by dust. "Beg pardon. My horse threw a shoe. I heard there's a smith nearby. If I don't reach him in time, might you allow me a night's rest in your barn? I'll pay for it." Celeste studied him, wary. The wide brim hid half his face, leaving only a hard jaw and a patchy beard. His coat was caked in trail dust, boots scuffed and torn. A drifter, she thought. Yet the voice held no hurry, no scheme, only weariness, steady and plain. She paused a few breaths, then said short, "My barn is old and rough. Don't expect comfort." The man nodded, removed his hat. Sun-darkened features showed, worn but firm. "My name's Ashton Carter. All I need is a roof till morning." Celeste led him toward the small house at the town's edge. The fence leaned, the roof bore dark patches of rot. The yard ended in a sagging stable. She pointed. "You can bed there. Tools in the corner. If you aim to tend your horse." Ashton bowed his head, hand running over the neck of the spent animal. In that small moment, Celeste caught his gaze. Gray-blue eyes, quiet, neither scornful nor curious. Unlike the stares in town, that look left her breathless. When she turned for the house, a young voice came from the doorway. "Ma'am, can he eat supper with us?" "I think he's hungry." Celeste froze. In the pantry lay only a bit of corn, a few potatoes, a scrap of dried meat. Enough for her alone. Yet one look at Ashton's tired face, at the gaunt horse, and she could not refuse. "Tonight, join us," she said softly. "There isn't much." Inside the narrow kitchen, lamplight flickered against rough wood walls. Celeste set down a pot of thin cornmeal, dividing it into 3 bowls. When Ashton's turn came, she ladled more into his and less for herself. He frowned. "Keep your share." "I'm used to." Little Celeste did not lift her eyes, only dropped another spoon of corn into his bowl. "You've ridden far. You need it more than me." As she passed the bowl, her hand brushed his calloused fingers. A heat rushed her arm and she pulled back quick. But before she turned away, Ashton looked up. His eyes caught hers for a breath, enough to set her heart racing. She bent her head, hiding the flush across her face. The meal went on in silence, broken only by the scrape of spoons. Ashton ate slow, each bite measured as though he meant to stretch the flavor. When finished, he rose, without a word, carried the bowl to the basin, and began to wash. Celeste started to protest, then stilled. His hands moved sure, practiced. The clink of dishes placed back in order filled the room. Watching him, Celeste felt something unfamiliar. Since her husband's death, every task had weighed on her alone, This was the first time another hand had lifted even the smallest burden. Night fell. Celeste showed Ashton to the barn. Wind slipped through leaning posts, stirring the dry hay. He spread a thin blanket across the straw and bowed. "Thank you, Celeste. You've given me more than I had any right to ask." She lingered a moment. The lamplight from the window lit his eyes. Quiet, grateful, free of judgment. Different from every gaze she endured in town. She only nodded, pulled her shawl tight, and went inside. Yet when the door closed, her heart still thundered, restless against her ribs. In the barn, Ashton sat still, broad frame swallowed in shadow. He ran a hand across his brow, breathing deep, his eyes turned toward the faint glow of the window where Celeste had vanished. In the silence, both of them knew this meeting was but the beginning of something that would change everything. Dawn spread pale light across the cracked land. Celeste rose as always, ready to stir the fire, but halted as soon as she stepped outside. At the chicken coop's corner stood Ashton. He had shed his coat, wearing only a rolled-sleeve shirt. The fabric strained across his shoulders, muscles tightening with each swing of the hammer. The coop door, long unhinged and banging in every wind, now rested firm in his grasp. Ashton replaced the rotted wood, drove nails with steady strikes. Sweat darkened his brow, sliding down his jawline, hair hanging loose. From the porch, Celeste watched, her chest tangled. She had grown used to doing everything alone, sweeping, patching roofs, mending fences. Not once since her husband's death had she seen a man spend his strength on this ground. The sight felt foreign, yet it pressed strangely against her ribs. When Ashton lifted his head, their eyes caught. He gave a nod, a tired but gentle smile. "I saw the coop near to falling. Didn't want you losing what chickens you've got left." Celeste bit her lip, voice small. "You needn't. It isn't your burden." Ashton only shrugged and kept on. No asking, no excuses, just the simple work of his hands. All morning, he never stopped. After the coop, he climbed the roof where Celeste had long wedged scrap boards against the leaks. His hammer rang sharp, shingles falling into place. Celeste carried a jug of water, set it by the tree. When he came down, shirt drenched, he bent low to drink, water spilling down his neck. Celeste turned away quickly, steadying herself against the warmth rising in her chest. By afternoon, Ashton worked at the back fence, fallen since last year's winds. He set posts, pulled wire, pressed beams tight, like he was stitching the land back to life. Each hammer fall, each drop of sweat, gave breath to a place that had known only silence. Celeste watched from a distance, fingers clenching her dress. Gratitude warred with unease. It had been so long since the house echoed with hammer and wood, not just the whistle of wind through cracks. Near sundown, Ashton still would not stop. Celeste stepped onto the porch, calling up to the roof where he was fitting a final board. "You've done enough. Rest now." The light is fading. Ashton smiled faintly, glancing down. "Just one more plank. Then you'll sleep without worry." Celeste frowned, turned to leave. Then a sharp crack split the air. The board beneath him gave way. She gasped, too late. His full weight crashed down, knocking her to the ground. They landed hard, Celeste beneath him. His breath rushed hot across her face. Their eyes locked, gray meeting deep brown, held longer than it should. She felt the rapid beat of his chest pressing hers, tangled with her own uneven breath. The scent of sweat, wood, and dust wrapped them both. For a few still seconds, the world stopped. Ashton reached, rough fingers brushing a damp curl from her cheek, tender as a whisper. Celeste flushed crimson, turning aside, scrambling to her feet, tearing free of his closeness. You ought to be more careful." Her voice trembled, betraying what she could not hide. Ashton sat up, wiped his brow, eyes still on her as she hurried inside. A smile flickered, part apology, part warmth he couldn't restrain. Celeste leaned against the door, hand pressed to her chest to steady the storm within. She knew it then, Her heart had stirred in a way she hadn't dared in years. A small flame had sparked in a house gone cold, and Ashton, left alone on the porch, gazed at the half-mended roof and thought quietly to himself, "Perhaps this is where I am meant to stay." Rumor traveled swifter than any prairie wind. In only a few days, the whole town was buzzing with the same tale. The Black Widow, Celeste Johnson, was harboring a drifter in her home. They called Ashton all manner of names: loafer, pauper, even fortune hunter lying in wait. And whenever they spoke of Celeste, it was with smirks and mocking glances. On Sunday, Celeste still went to church as she always had. She sat in the back pew, head bowed to the sermon. Yet instead of comfort, the preacher devoted a long passage to a woman's reputation, warning that one misstep could cast her life into shadow. No name was spoken, but every eye in the chapel turned her way. Her hands locked tight in her lap, nails pressing into flesh. Her heart ached, but her spine stayed straight, her gaze fixed on the cross. She would not weep before them. The next day at market, her strength was tested again. Amid the rows of vegetables, Dalton appeared. Immaculate in dress, moving with authority, he strode to Celeste as if no one else were there. "How goes it, Celeste?" Dalton boomed, loud enough for half the market. "That broken coop of yours, has it got a new master to fix it? Or is that drifter of yours tending to more than chickens?" The crowd broke into laughter, mocking stares burning her skin. Celeste pressed her lips tight, tried to walk on, but Dalton pressed closer. His rough hand clamped her hip, holding her like a brand. Her body went rigid, heart hammering, shame rising hot in her throat. Then another hand appeared. Ashton, no one saw him arrive. He stood calm, though fire burned in his eyes. Slowly, he pried Dalton's hand off her, gripping his wrist until the knuckles turned white. His voice rang deep and rough, cutting clear through the silence. "I'd trade 10 herds for one night inside you." The market erupted. Some roared with laughter, others gaped. Women whispered in knots. Men bent double in crude amusement. To all, it sounded no more than a reckless boast from an empty-pocketed wanderer. Dalton jerked his hand back, eyes narrowed, lips curled cold. "Big words, drifter. Can you back them up?" Ashton did not flinch. He straightened tall, gray-blue eyes fixed steady. "1 week," he declared, his tone like an oath. "I'll prove it." The air thickened, heavy with the echo of his vow. Beside him, Celeste's hands shook so hard she nearly dropped her basket of corn. She could not believe what had just unfolded. The noise, the stares, the ridicule, all of it threatened to crush her. But then Ashton turned to her. His gaze met hers, not challenging, not claiming, but burning with a quiet fire that warmed her chest. In that look alone, Celeste felt something fierce ignite within. She did not know what he meant to prove. She did not know what the next week would bring. But she knew this. Never in all her lonely days had anyone dared, in the heart of town, to stake his honor on a single word for her. That night, back in her small house, Celeste sat long beside the oil lamp. Outside, wind whistled through the fence, carrying the scent of red dust. Inside her, fear, shame, and a fragile thread of hope twined together. Ashton sat silent on the porch, as always. But Celeste knew so long as he remained, the flame in her heart would not go out. That evening, the sky darkened faster than usual. The herd of gaunt cattle wandered slow across the southern ridge in search of what little grass remained. Ashton told Celeste she ought to ride out with him, for thieves often prowled in this season. She hesitated, but when she saw him waiting in the saddle, eyes steady as if offering to share her burden, she nodded. The trail lay quiet. Celeste's horse, unaccustomed to distance, plodded unevenly, and Ashton kept close, steadying her reins when the animal balked. The silence between them was no longer heavy. It carried the rhythm of two breaths falling into step. At an open stretch, they lit a small fire. Smoke curled sideways in the wind, painting their weary faces with shifting light. Ashton crouched low, stacking wood with his broad, darkened hands. Celeste handed him a dull knife for splitting twigs. When their fingers touched, she pulled back quickly, but Ashton only gave a faint smile, as though he knew the old guard inside her was slowly giving way. The fire cracked, pushing the night back by inches. The cattle grazed faint in the distance, a soft backdrop of sound. Then Ashton spoke, his voice sudden but quiet. "Long ago, I had a wife." Celeste turned, caught off guard. Ashton's gaze stayed on the flames, eyes fixed far beyond. Her name was Mary. We married when I was just past 20. Not long after, sickness swept our valley. She fell ill and was gone within days. I buried her under an oak behind our house. After that, I couldn't stay. I sold the land, drifted from place to place, never looking to find anything again. His tone was even, yet every word carried the weight of years. Celeste listened in silence, her own hands clenched tight in her lap. After a long pause, she answered low, "I lost everything too. My husband worked at the logging camp. The accident. It was over in a blink. They brought home a body so broken I couldn't recognize him. I never got to speak the last word. Night wind moved through, carrying the tang of smoke and a sorrow too deep for sound. Two lives, once strangers, bound by the same wound, losing the only love they had when still young." Celeste drew a deep breath, her words barely above a whisper. "Since then, I've only known how to harden myself. They laugh, they trample, I let them. But every night, when I am alone, I ask myself, am I still a woman, or just a shadow dragging through the days?" Ashton turned to her. Firelight flashed in his gray-blue eyes, restless as stormed seas. He said nothing. Instead, he slowly reached out, his rough hand closing around hers. The touch was not fierce, not sudden, just enough to still the tremor in her fingers. Celeste stiffened, yet did not pull away. Warmth seeped through her skin, into her chest. Ashton's other hand rose, lifting her chin with gentle weight. Her eyes had no choice but to meet his, held there in the hush broken only by the pop of burning wood. In the glow, his eyes burned bright. Within them she saw the grief, the solitude, and beneath it all, a hunger quiet but unyielding. Their breaths mingled, so close that a tilt forward would bring their mouths together. The air tightened around them. Celeste's pulse pounded, heat rushed her cheeks. Ashton did not press, did not rush. He only waited, as though for her to grant the smallest sign. At last, Celeste turned her head, letting her gaze fall back to the fire. She was not ready. Ashton understood. His hand eased, leaving only his fingers clasped with hers, firm as a promise of steadiness. They sat in silence, the firelight between them. Yet in that silence, Celeste felt it clear. The wall around her heart had begun to crack, letting a sliver of light inside. And Ashton knew from the way her eyes had met his that she had given him more than words could ever hold. That night, clouds smothered the moon, laying a heavy darkness over the weathered cabin. Inside the small room, Celeste sat alone at the wooden table, her fingers circling an empty cup. The wind hissed through the cracks in the boards, a long sigh that never seemed to end. Since that evening by the fire with Ashton, her heart had not known rest. His eyes, his hand clasping hers, his breath so near, it all pressed upon her chest, relentless. The door creaked. Ashton filled the frame, tall and broad. He had washed at the well, hair damp, shirt clinging to his chest, each cord of muscle plain beneath the fabric. Celeste startled, half rising, but his hand lifted. "Don't," he said low, his voice rough, heavy with something he could not restrain. She sank back, pulse racing. Ashton stepped closer, gaze fixed on her face. Each stride seemed to close the space between two worlds. When only a breath lay between them, he stopped. "From the first moment," his voice rumbled, "I wanted you." Celeste froze, her hands clutching her skirt. Tears burst forth, hot against her cheeks. Months of silent endurance, nights spent gripping her own loneliness, now breaking open. "I'm so tired, Ashton," she whispered through sobs. "They treat me like spoiled goods, a stain on this town. I only want, just once, to be a woman again, to be seen, to be wanted, not pitied." Ashton bent low, his rough palm lifting her tear-streaked face. His thumb brushed the wetness, so tender it made her tremble. "I don't pity you," he said, his eyes steady as if carved into her soul. "I desire you." Those words tore down every wall she had built. A sob caught in her throat as she fell into him. Ashton wrapped her tight, holding her as though they might fuse together. The kiss came sudden, fierce, fire meeting wind. Heat surged between them, breaths tangled, all distance gone. At first she shook, but her arms rose around his neck, clinging as if she feared he would vanish. Ashton met her with a hunger long restrained. Their mouths broke and found each other again, urgent, unyielding. Each touch shattered the hardened shell she had worn, laying bare the heart that still yearned for love. He lifted her, set her upon the wooden bed. Their eyes locked, unwilling to part, as though breaking gaze might undo it all. He bent, kissed her again, his hand tracing down her arm, fingers unsteady yet sure. Celeste shivered, her body awakening after years buried in silence. Their breath quickened, mingling with the wind outside. The cold room blazed with warmth. every sense strained. The scent of sweat, the hammer of hearts, the burn of skin against skin. Celeste closed her eyes, surrendering to his embrace. No whispers of the town reached her now, no weight of scorn. That night, she was not the widow mocked, not the shadow dragging through each day. She was Celeste, a woman desired, loved, seen with the full heart of a man. Beside her, Ashton pulled her tighter as if swearing she would never stand alone again. In the darkness they joined, trembling, fierce and whole, as though each had recovered the part long lost. That night, neither bore the burden of the past. Only the truth remained. Two wandering souls had found one another. The morning after that blazing night, pale sunlight slipped through the cracks of the wooden shutters, falling across Celeste's face still damp with tears and marked by a faint smile. Ashton sat at the edge of the bed, his calloused hand locked as if wrestling with himself. When she stirred awake, he bent to press a kiss upon her brow, then whispered, "Celeste, I have to go." Her breath caught, heart clenching. "Go where?" Ashton drew a long breath. His eyes were calm as a still lake, yet beneath lay iron resolve. "I spoke before Dalton and the whole town. 1 week. I must prove my words were not hollow. If I don't, they'll bury your name in scorn and turn you into their jest. I won't allow it." Celeste sat up, the quilt slipping from her shoulders, her skin still marked by the embrace of the night before. With trembling fingers, she touched his hand. "And me? What if you leave me here alone?" Ashton clasped her hand firm, his gray-blue eyes etched with oath. 7 days. Wait for me. Trust me, Celeste. I will return." There was something in his gaze she could not doubt, yet fear lingered, clinging like a shadow that refused to loosen. On the first day after Ashton's departure, Celeste busied herself with what she could, mending clothes, gathering wood, tending the coop. But every time her eyes strayed to the yard where his presence no longer stood, a hollow ache pressed down. That night, the bed felt wide and empty. No warmth but the smell of old timber and the wind slipping through the seams. On the second day, rumor burned through town like dry grass aflame. At the market, Mrs. Henderson whispered to the cluster of women, "See? Foolish black widow, letting a drifter into her house." Now Mr. gone, the laughter that followed cut Celeste deep, her hands shaking as she set a clutch of eggs upon the counter. On the third day, Dalton came. He rode a black horse, heavy coat lending him an air of command. He stopped at her yard, lips curling in a smile half pity, half contempt. "He's left you, Celeste," Dalton said, loud enough for neighbors to hear. "I told you before. A man like that only wanted one thing. Once he's taken it, he's gone." Celeste stood on the porch, her fingers white from clutching themselves. "Go home, Dalton." He swung down, stepped close, bracing a rough hand on the post to block her path. "Don't be stubborn. Marry me, and you'll be free of want. Your land safe, your debts gone. Do you think you can hold out forever alone?" His words dug like knives into her deepest doubt. She faltered, but lifted her chin. "I don't need your pity." Dalton sneered, eyes dropping over her figure, then back to her flushed face. "Pity? No, Celeste. I desire you, But unlike him, I can give you standing, silence every tongue in this town. He gripped her arm, his breath thick with tobacco, pressing close. Celeste struggled, heart pounding with fear. Just then, a neighbor passed by, and Dalton released her, adjusting his coat. With a smirk, he said, "Think on it. Don't wait for a man who may never return." He mounted, hooves pounding heavy as his threat hung in the dust. On the fourth day, Celeste did not step outside. She sat by the fire, eyes vacant on the flame that burned low. At night, she curled tight, haunted by the memory of Ashton's touch, each kiss that had made her whole again. She wanted to believe his promise, but Dalton's words rang like a curse. He's gone. On the fifth day, a short rain came sudden, drops drumming the tin roof. Celeste rushed to the porch, face lifted to the sky. Yet instead of joy, tears slid down with the rain, streaking her cheeks. On the sixth day, the wind howled fierce, shutters banging open. Celeste sat alone in the dark, shoulders trembling. Dalton's taunts, the town's laughter, all mixed with her worst fear. What if Ashton never returned? That night, she broke. Her sobs filled the small room, hands covering her face. Her heart felt wrung dry, aching with grief and shame for ever daring to hope. The seventh day came, sunset painting the horizon in burning red. Celeste stood on the porch, eyes fixed on the long road winding back from town. She had stood there many times, but never so hollow, never so desperate. The wind tore at her dress, tangled her hair across her face. She waited until her legs went numb, but the road gave her only dust, no rider. When darkness fell, Celeste shut the door and bolted it hard. She lay down, eyes dry but soul emptied. In the stillness, she whispered to no one, "Perhaps Dalton was right. Perhaps Ashton was only a dream." Tears came again, soaking her pillow. In the cry of the wind outside, Celeste curled into herself, and for the first time in many months, she let despair swallow her whole. The seventh night, wind howled through the cracks of the wooden door. The darkness in the cabin so thick Celeste could scarcely breathe. She sat hunched at the edge of the bed, eyes dry, tears long spent. 7 days had gnawed away at her faith until only a hollow ache remained. She had barred the door, locking out the last scrap of hope. Yet her heart still strained toward the trail beyond, where she had stood waiting till her knees ached, where every swirl of dust had raised a spark only to crush it. Knock, knock, knock. The sound struck sharp and familiar. Celeste jolted, wide-eyed, her breath held tight. She thought she dreamed until a rough, low voice carried through the wood. "Celeste, I've come back." Her heart stopped, then hammered wild. Legs trembling, she rushed to the door, hand faltering on the latch. The knock came again, harder. She flung the bar aside and pulled it open. Ashton stood there, tall frame cloaked in trail dust, hair tangled, face worn from wind and sun. Yet his gray-blue eyes blazed, a fire that had never dimmed. Celeste broke. She fell against his chest, sobbing hard, her cries spilling like the first rain after endless drought. "You don't have to prove anything. All I wanted was you to come back. Just you." Ashton wrapped her in his arms, crushing her close as if to guard against losing her again. He pushed the door shut, then without pause pressed his mouth to hers. The kiss was fierce, unbridled, carrying every hunger bottled up over 7 long days. Celeste trembled, tears mingling with his lips, but her body met him with equal fire. Her hands clasped his neck, pulling him closer still, desperate to merge into him. The heavy bag on Ashton's shoulder thudded to the floor, forgotten. Nothing mattered but the embrace, the kiss that consumed them both. He lifted her easily, setting her upon the worn wooden table. His arms locked firm around her waist, his mouth trailing from her lips to her neck, across skin that quivered beneath his touch. "I missed you," Ashton panted between kisses. "Missed you? Till it drove me near mad." Celeste gasped, clutching at him. "I feared you wouldn't return." "Each night, I thought you had left me." He stilled, his eyes meeting hers through the blur of tears. "I gave my word, and I will never leave you." Then his mouth found hers again, this time without restraint. Clothes fell away, piece by piece, until nothing remained but skin pressed to skin, heat flooding the room. Breath tangled, heartbeats thundered, their bodies answering a hunger too long denied. Celeste yielded, letting Ashton claim what despair had nearly stolen. Each kiss, each touch carried a vow that they belonged, that the week of absence had only stoked the blaze higher. His hands guided her, strong yet tender, pulling her with him into rhythm and fire. Celeste met him with all she was, her body and soul dissolving into his. The small cabin filled with the creak of wood, the ragged rush of breath, the pulse of two bodies entwined. Outside, wind roared against the boards, but within, the warmth of their union drove winter away. When at last the storm inside them quieted, Ashton still held her fast. His rough fingers brushed her damp cheek. "I came back, Celeste, just as I promised." Through tears, she smiled, resting her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. That night she knew with certainty, Ashton had not only returned in body, he had returned to stay forever. That morning, the Texas sky stretched pale and thin. Mist clung low, and yet Celeste's chest carried the weight of stone. Ashton had returned after 7 days of trial, had held her through the night, as if he would never let go again. But at dawn, he clasped her hand, his voice steady. "Today, we go to town." Celeste's eyes widened, fear flickering in their dark depths. They will say terrible things." Ashton only tightened his grip, the steel of resolve flashing in his gray-blue gaze. Let them see. This is the day I keep my word." When they stepped into the square, the town had already gathered, a crowd buzzing like a stirred hive. Whispers lashed at their backs. "The Black Widow dares show her face with him. She's nothing but a passing game. Wait till Dalton puts an end to this." Celeste faltered, her pulse racing. Every eye clung to her, filled with contempt, derision, hungry curiosity. She longed to turn back, but Ashton's hand held firm, leading her straight to the square's center. Dalton was waiting, clad in black, boots gleaming, his posture carved from arrogance. Beside him stood Reverend Williams and a banker, a scene staged for pressure. At the sight of them, Dalton smiled, thin and cruel, his voice carrying across the square. "Neighbors, behold what I warned you of. A black widow without dignity, taking a nameless drifter into her bed. Will we let our father's land be shamed this way?" Murmurs swelled, heads nodding. Some looked away, but no one spoke for her. Celeste's knees weakened, her whole body trembling. Ashton wasted no time. He pulled Celeste up onto the wooden platform before the general store and suddenly raised their joined hands high. Silence fell sharp. Never had a white man taken the hand of a black woman so openly before the whole town. The hush cut like a drawn blade. Ashton's voice rang out, deep and unyielding. "You mock her. You scorn us. Today I will prove myself." He turned and dropped a heavy sack onto the table at center. The thud of metal filled the air. When the bag split open, gold spilled out, glittering in the first light of day. Gasps broke loose. Mouths fell open. The people of that town had never seen such wealth. Ashton turned to Celeste then, his gaze softening, his voice thick with feeling. "Celeste, as I promised, before all here, I ask you to be my wife." She staggered, breath catching. All the nights of doubt, all the fear he would not return, shattered in an instant. Tears streamed down her face. The crowd stirred, no longer jeers, but awe, hushed wonder. Dalton stood frozen, his face blanching, then burning red. Rage cracked his voice. "Fraud! You think a sack of gold blinds us?" Ashton faced him square, his words falling like hammer blows. "You call me drifter. But the truth is this. I am Ashton Carter, only son of the Carter family, owners of 3,000 acres to the east. I left to find myself, and in that journey, I found what matters most: Celeste Johnson." The square erupted. Voices clashed in astonishment, eyes shifting in a heartbeat from disdain to reverence. Celeste pressed her hand to her mouth, trembling. She stared at Ashton, this man who had shared her meager cornmeal, who had mended her broken roof, and learned he bore a name and power beyond anything she imagined. Dalton's jaw clenched, his skin ashen with sweat. He searched the crowd for support, but found none. The smirks were gone. The nods turned to stares of respect, stares aimed at Ashton. With a roar of frustration, Dalton ripped his hat from his head, hurled it to the ground, and swung into the saddle. His horse's hooves thundered down the road, carrying away his disgrace. Ashton stepped down from the platform, turned to Celeste. His hand, warm and steady, lifted her tear-streaked face. "Celeste," he whispered low enough for her alone, "I've come back, and I will never leave again. Will you be my wife?" Her tears broke into a radiant smile. She nodded, her voice trembling but resolute. "Yes, Ashton, I will." Applause rose, scattered at first, then swelling until the whole square shook with it. Some laughed with relief, others wiped their eyes. For the first time, Celeste met no looks of contempt, only respect. Ashton drew her into his arms, kissed her deeply, openly, before them all. This was no secret, no shame. It was a declaration, fierce and unshakable. Celeste would never stand alone again. They stood together, hand in hand, like two pillars rooted in the square, beneath a morning that bore witness to more than love. It bore witness to dignity restored. Spring came late that year, but when it did, it came in glory. The first rains washed over the cracked Texas plains, coaxing tender blades of grass to rise green and strong. Hillsides bloomed with wildflowers, purple, gold, and white. a quilt of color across land once barren. In the little house at the edge of town, Celeste opened the window wide, drawing in the damp earth's fragrance mingled with sweet blossoms. Her heart trembled as if still unwilling to believe what was unfolding into truth. Ashton had kept his word. Only days after Dalton's disgrace, he strode into the bank, dropped a heavy sack of gold upon the desk, and signed the papers that wiped away every debt her late husband had left behind. The news spread swift as prairie fire, and for the first time in years, when Celeste walked through the market, no cruel laughter followed her. Instead came curious, awkward stares, some even nodding and greeting, speaking her name plain rather than spitting old slurs. That evening, Ashton sat on the porch, watching the sun dip behind the mountains. Celeste carried 2 cups of hot tea, set one beside him, then took her place at his side. He turned, took her hand, his voice steady yet tender. "Celeste, we've lived through too much shadow. I want to marry you, as soon as spring allows. No revelry, no pomp, only a vow before God, and your eyes on mine." Her throat tightened, tears catching the sunset's glow. She nodded, whispering, "I've been waiting for this day." The wedding dawned bright and clear. The sky stretched wide and blue, soft clouds drifting easy, the sun spilling gold across fields of wildflowers. No grand carriage bore her. Instead, Celeste was carried to the small chapel in a plain wooden wagon, its benches covered with patched white lace sewn by old Mrs. Collins. Her dress was simple, but the veil of white lace draped over her hair gave her a radiance like morning itself. Townsfolk gathered at the doorway, some merely curious, others earnest to witness the redemption of a woman once scorned. Ashton stood by the pine-wood altar, where Reverend Williams, who had once preached of a woman's reputation, now held himself solemn and ready to bear witness. When Celeste entered, her hand trembling in Mrs. Collins', the murmur of voices hushed to silence. Ashton's gray-blue eyes shone bright, his lips pressed firm as if to dam the swell of feeling within. He reached out, took Celeste's hand into his own, and held it tight. The Reverend's voice carried grave yet warm. "Today, before God and before this community, we witness Ashton Carter and Celeste Johnson pledging themselves for life." Celeste listened as her heart thundered like a drum. When asked, "Do you take this vow?" she lifted her gaze to Ashton. A tear slipped free, but her smile blazed. "Yes. From this day." We walked together. Ashton's reply came rough with emotion, but steady. "I vow to love you, to guard you, until my last breath." The Reverend nodded, voice firm. "I declare you husband and wife." In that moment, Ashton bent and kissed her. The kiss bore no fire of lust, but the solemnity of a vow sealed eternal. In the dim light of the small chapel, with wind whispering through the cracks, they found the wholeness they once thought lost forever. Afterward, Ashton led Celeste out beneath the open sky. The whole town stood waiting, and this time there was no scorn. Applause rose, hesitant at first, then swelling bold. Some women offered baskets of bread, children tossed wildflower petals plucked fresh from the fields. Celeste lifted her head high, though her vision blurred with tears, tears of joy, not shame. Ashton leaned close, whispering against her ear, "You are mine now. None can take that from us." She pressed his hand, answering, and you are mine. From this day, every road we walk together. Above them, the first swallows of spring darted into the sky, their song ringing like a hymn of triumph. The meadows, rich with bloom, stretched before them like a wedding carpet. In that moment, Celeste knew her life, after all the years of sorrow, had turned a page, and this new chapter was written in light, in love, in hope. After the simple, tender wedding, Celeste thought her heart had finally found rest. The early days of spring passed in a rare peace. Each morning she woke in Ashton's arms, listening to birdsong beyond the porch and the faint drift of coffee on the stove. By afternoon, they worked side by side, mending fences, planting the first seeds of the season. Folks from town stopped by now and then, their looks no longer cruel but curious, even softening into acceptance. Yet Ashton carried a silence she could not ignore. More than once she caught him standing on the rise beyond the house, his gaze set eastward, toward a horizon that led to some far country. Celeste noticed, but did not ask, until one windy afternoon when he took her hand and led her to the wooden table on the porch. His eyes were solemn, though not without gentleness. He spoke slow, voice steady in the breeze. "Celeste, I've kept something from you. You deserve to know." Her brow furrowed, unease flickering. "What is it, Ashton?" He paused, weighing his words. Then his rough hand tightened around hers, gray-blue eyes fixed on her face. "I want you to come with me back to Ashton Ranch. It's where I was born. Rich grasslands, a river winding through, a house that once belonged to my family. There, we can truly begin again. No more whispers, no more shadows. Only a future." Celeste froze. His words opened a door to a new world, one full of promise. Yet in her chest, a hidden tether pulled tight. She rose, stepping out into the yard, eyes on the parched soil beneath her feet. This was where Nathan, her late husband, had labored, and where he had fallen. He had spoken no last request, but Celeste had bound herself to one: never to abandon this land, never to let it be taken. "You ask me to leave all this behind?" Her voice trembled. "This is Nathan's ground. It holds his rest." Ashton rose, came close, his hand settling gently on her shoulder. He did not rush her. He only met her tear-brimmed eyes. "I understand, and I honor it. But look around, Celeste. The land is spent. Rain is scarce, the stock is wasting away. How long can you carry this burden alone? Must you bleed yourself dry, clinging to sorrow?" His words struck deep. She remembered nights by the empty well, weeping from helplessness. Days of drought, burying her chickens by the dozen, her hands blistered with no one to aid her. Ashton lifted her chin, holding her gaze. "I don't ask you to betray the past. I ask you to carry it with you, every memory, every ache. But set it down in a place where hope can live. Ashton Ranch is more than land. It can be our home. A place where you need not brace yourself every moment. A place where you can smile." Unashamed, Celeste shut her eyes, tears slipping down. Nathan's face rose in memory, sun-browned skin, that gentle smile. But slowly, it faded, and in its place came Ashton's steady gaze, waiting for her answer. Her voice broke as she turned back. I fear if I leave, Nathan will not forgive me." Ashton gathered her into his arms, holding her as if to shield her very soul. Celeste, if he truly loved you, he would want you free of misery. No man would wish the woman he cherished to wither beside barren ground. Let me take you where you can breathe again, where you can live. Her heart quivered. His words, his breath, his warmth, all pressed against the walls she had built inside herself. That night, she lay awake listening to spring winds slip through the shutters, the restless shuffle of horses in the pen. Every sound felt like fate whispering at her door. Near dawn, with the horizon glowing pink, Celeste sat up. She looked around the small wooden house, its walls stained with sweat and tears, its nights echoing with her lonely cries. Her hand touched the cracks in the boards, the broken chair, the framed likeness of Nathan on the shelf. "I have kept my vow," she whispered, voice shaking yet firm. "I stayed. But now, I choose to live." That morning she stepped onto the porch. Ashton was already waiting, seated on the step, as if he had known her decision. When she came near, he rose, his eyes alight with hope. Celeste swallowed hard, then nodded. Her voice was quiet, but sure. "I will go with you." "Take me home to Ashton Ranch," he said nothing more, only pulled her close, his embrace fierce and unyielding. On his worn face a smile broke like sunlight. In that moment, Celeste knew. This choice was not betrayal of the past, but a rebirth. A page turned. She was no longer the widow shadowed by scorn, but a wife chosen in love, a woman ready to walk toward the future. The road to Ashton Ranch stretched like a ribbon of green in the morning light. That spring, the Texas sky was clear as glass, the air rich with the scent of young grass and wildflowers. When the wagon rolled beneath the great wooden gate carved with the name Carter, Celeste tightened her hand around Ashton's. Before them lay a land without end. Rolling pastures reached the horizon, broken by groves of ancient oaks and a river that shimmered in the sun. In the distance rose the main house, broad timbers, white-painted, standing proud against the sweep of green. Celeste felt as though she had stepped into another world, one she had never dared to dream. Ashton leaned close, his voice low against her ear. "This is our home." Their second wedding was held right there on Ashton Ranch, more grand than the first, yet still simple at heart. No longer the humble chapel with borrowed lace, but a meadow alive with blossoms and laughter. Townsfolk came, as did old friends of the Carter family. Even those who once scorned Celeste now stood to witness. Chairs lined the grass in neat rows, draped in white cloth. Garlands of wildflowers marked the path. When Celeste stepped forward, her white dress flowing, her veil lifted by the breeze, every eye followed her. For the first time, she felt no shame, no weight of whispers, only warmth, only wonder. At the end of the aisle, Ashton waited in a plain black suit, solemn yet radiant. His eyes lit the moment she drew near. When her hand settled in his, both of them trembled, not with fear, but with joy too large to hold. Reverend Williams presided once more, though this time his voice rang with gravity and grace. "Before God, before this community, we witness Ashton Carter and Celeste Johnson step into a new beginning." Celeste looked at Ashton, tears bright upon her cheeks, her smile unshaken. When he bent to kiss her, Applause thundered across the meadow, rising with the cries of celebration. In the days that followed, Celeste became the keeper of Ashton Ranch. No longer the widow in a crumbling shack, she was a wife, mistress of a wide kitchen, bearer of warmth to a house alive with fire and song. Each morning she brewed coffee while Ashton walked the pastures. At midday they shared plain meals, their laughter carrying through the halls. Celeste learned to keep the ranch books, counting cattle, measuring seed, tallying wages. At first her hand faltered, but Ashton guided her patiently. Some nights he found her still bent over the ledger, the lamplight catching the tip of her pen. He would rest a hand on her shoulder, and she would lift her face, smiling faintly. "I'm learning to be Mrs. Carter." For Ashton, it was rebirth. Once a drifter who had turned his back on home, he had now claimed it again, not for himself alone, but for them both. Each evening when he returned from the fields and saw Celeste waiting on the porch, her dress stirring in the wind, he knew he would never be lonely again. One summer's evening, when the work was quiet, Ashton led Celeste up the highest hill on the ranch. Below them stretched a sea of green, the sun sinking into waves of violet and flame. They stood hand in hand, the breeze tugging at her hair. Ashton drew her close, his arm firm around her waist. Celeste gazed at the sunset, her eyes shining. Her voice trembled, soft but sure. "If I had known a day like this would come, I would not have feared so much in the past." Ashton pressed a kiss to her hair, his whisper deep and steady. "We cannot change what was, but we can write what comes next, and I will write it with you." Celeste nodded, her heart full of peace. In that moment, every pain, every lonely night, every scornful glance fell away. Only the light remained, love's steady flame, and the certainty that at last they had found their true home. Autumn laid its golden veil across Ashton Ranch. The distant mountains faded into a soft haze, and the prairie stretched wide beneath a gentle sun. Celeste stood on the porch, her hand resting lightly against her belly, where a small life was quietly growing. The news had come to her with surprise, wrapped in a deep, trembling joy. Ashton learned one morning as Celeste brought him a cup of coffee out on the porch. Her eyes shone in a way he had never seen before. She guided his rough hand to her stomach and whispered, "Ashton, we're going to have a child." For a heartbeat he stood silent, and then he pulled her into his arms, laughter breaking against the wind, choked with emotion. "God has given us a little angel." From that day on, Ashton grew even more careful with her. He cut back on long rides, spent more hours at home, and built a cradle from pine with his own hands, carving simple flowers into its sides. Each evening, he sat close and spoke to the child not yet born, about the wide fields, the river winding through their land, and the love that bound father and mother together. Celeste watched him, her heart filled with peace. Winter crept in, and with it came the cry of new life. Inside the wooden house, the first clear wail rang out. Celeste lay exhausted, her hair damp with sweat. But when she held the small, wrinkled body against her chest, tears spilled freely down her cheeks. Ashton sat beside her, his rough hands trembling as they stroked her hair, then bent to press a kiss on the foreheads of mother and child alike. That night, the fire roared in the hearth, while the wind howled bitterly outside. Yet within, warmth surrounded them like a blessing. "Our little angel," Celeste whispered through shining tears. "You are proof that from loss, love can bloom again." Ashton clasped her hand, his gaze on the child glowing with pride. From that moment, he knew they were no longer just two souls clinging to each other. They now had a new reason to live, to build, to protect. Ashton Ranch, once merely a stretch of land, had become a true home. When night finally fell across the vast prairie, Celeste and Ashton stood side by side, their hands entwined as they watched the horizon burn red with sunset. They had endured whispers, loneliness, and trial, and had emerged with a life remade. This home was not merely beams and shingles, but love, respect, and unshakable trust. Their story reminds us that no matter how much sorrow the past may hold, there is always another beginning waiting ahead. Love does not come when we demand it. It comes when our hearts dare to open. Dear friends, if this story stirred your own memories of a hand once held, or a chance at love missed too soon, please share them with us in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell so you can journey with us through more stories that warm the soul. Sometimes, all it takes is a look and a promise to change an entire life.